Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Tantra's Mantra, where we go behind and beyond the tech news headlines. I'm your host, Prakash Sangam, founder and principal at Tantra Analyst. Today, we will talk about a company which I don't think we ever covered on this show, and that is Adobe, which is famous for its digital content creator tools, of course. They have been in the news recently because of Firefly, their text to image Gen AI model. I've written a few articles about Adobe and a few specifically about Firefly. I will include the links to them in the episode description. Please do check them out. Okay, so Adobe recently had their annual summit in Las Vegas, which was very well organized in my view, and it was very well attended as well, of course. It had great speaker lineup and provided a lot of content. More importantly, the context in terms of Gen AI adoption in enterprises, its evolution, and so on. To discuss and analyze the event and its key takeaways, I am delighted to welcome back fellow analyst and president of TEChnalysis, Bob O'Donnell. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Prakash. Happy to be here again.
Yeah, so we had him on the show before discussing Intel Foundry business in an earlier episode.
Yeah.
You may want to check that out as well. I'll put the link in the description for that too. So, Bob, I think the Adobe Summit was very nice. As I mentioned, well attended. I really liked how Adobe planned the keynotes. The first day was more about product pitch, market landscape, etc., the traction they are seeing, and so on. So the main focus is on company itself, and the second day was all about its customers.
Right.
The customers presenting their individual or company's digital transformation journey. That was of course intertwined with Adobe's product messaging and so on, right? So what was your view on there?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And it was I don't know if it was your first one, but it was my first Adobe Summit. So it was interesting kind of going in. I wasn't entirely sure what to expect. I mean, a lot of these tech events kind of have a relatively similar structure, and theirs did too. But still, there's always the details of how each company kind of does it. And like you said, they, very well run, very well attended. And they had that product focused first day where they talked about a whole bunch of interesting stuff that we can get into.
Hmm.
And by the way, I'll send you the link to the column that I wrote on it. You could put into the show notes as well because I've got one too.
Absolutely.
And then of course then talking about the customers. And it's interesting because for years tech events they did ironically they talked so much about the product. It was like the customers were always an afterthought.
Hmm.
Clearly you could see that's not the case with Adobe. And it's for Adobe, it's really interesting because as you said, everybody knows about their content creation tools, things like Photoshop and Premiere, and of course now with Firefly. But there's that whole other side of their business around the marketing, and customization and ad campaign management and all this kind of stuff. And what was really interesting to me was how they kind of combined those two worlds, um, with one product in particular that they introduced at this event
Hmm.
called Gen Studio.
Hmm.
And I don't know about you, but to me, that was cool because it kind of brought both halves of Adobe together in a way that I hadn't really kind of seen before.
Yeah, and also I mean it's like one simple tool that encompass everything, and of course it also has a Firefly in there as well, especially for smaller enterprises who cannot afford all these different tools. Not only buying them, they don't come cheap, and as well as managing them as well, right? You need a dedicated IT department if you will
Yep.
to manage, but Gen Studio I think is a clean nice set of tools in a single suite, so makes it easier for relatively smaller enterprises, right?
Yeah, and getting back to the customer thing, because I diverted us slightly there, but on
Yeah.
your customer comment, and what I had started to say as well is we are starting to see more of these tech vendors focus more on customer examples and real world deployments of this stuff. And look, everybody in the world advertises,
Hmm.
well, almost all, most companies.
Yeah.
And so it was really interesting. They had a huge range of customers that are leveraging their stuff.
Correct.
And it was very interesting to see kind of everything from, they had Major League Baseball, and they had the NHL, I think, they had,
Delta Airlines. Yeah.
yeah, and Delta Airlines, and then, all kinds, and then there was that bank from the UK that was there. I mean, just all over the map in terms of the types of customers that they had. And so that was interesting because you could see how different
Hmm.
kinds of companies have different types of needs. And yet they were able to, for some companies, they able to use everything that Adobe has, and others were like, oh, well, these are the pieces that we need, and this is how it works. So definitely interesting to see that.
Cool. So I really like the Guy Raz story on the second day about his podcast, and
Yeah,
I mean, I really like his storytelling, but he intertwined these Adobe messages and endorsement in a very indirect way, as if in a matter of fact way. He did marketing without doing marketing, right?
right. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's true. You're right. It was, and he, again, it's interesting because a lot of what Adobe, of course, helps people to do is to tell stories. That's their whole point, the marketing stories that you can create with their video editing tools or their image creation tools. That's all about creating an image and telling a story. And, if you do that well, that engages people. And sometimes it, engages you enough to say, hey, I want to buy this, or product or service or whatever it is. Or,
Indeed, indeed. So, getting into some of the themes and the takeaways, I think one of the
yeah,
big themes
no,
was more of trying to show that the Gen AI, which was introduced last year, about a year ago, was more on a trial basis and so on. But here they wanted to make sure that they are graduating that to a real commercial tool with real users and real customers and real benefits and so on, right? So that was, they did not say in those words in my view, but that was pretty apparent that Firefly and Gen AI is real for them and their customers.
yeah, no, absolutely. And, and what's interesting is they recognized that one of the things that Gen AI is really good at is some of these really tedious tasks.
Hmm.
So if you think about it, the idea of customizing to, I mean, they had so many different demographic groups they could target. They have so much data from that marketing side of the house, and so they could figure out ways to just ever so slightly tweak, in some cases, or make some major changes to that, so that the message that went out to these different groups, um, was really targeted at them. And if that had to be done manually, that would just take forever. So Gen AI is a great tool to be able to kind of mash up, hey, let's create a million variations, not a million, but
Yeah.
a lot of variations
Yeah.
that can be created for these different groups. And then also, even the dumb things like, hey, each of these social media platforms has a slightly different physical ad size format.
Hmm.
And in the old days, they used to have somebody who would, recreate that, an ad to fit the formats. Instead, they could just say, okay, crank this out, and use generative AI to automatically stretch and scale perfectly to each platform. And as dumb as that is, that's hugely time saving for a lot of organizations.
Indeed, of course. And also, I mean, that was on the one side of the spectrum. The other side, you have come up with your company's theme or a campaign and so on, but you want to keep it fresh. So you change colors, you change backgrounds, and you change the landscape and other things on these pictures used in the advertisements. I think that is not really mundane work, but takes a lot of time and resources of the creative groups that companies have. But when you have Firefly, you basically type it in, and it in seconds it changes.
Yeah.
So that kind of shows lots of improvement in productivity and keeping your content pipeline always full and so on, right? I mean, content creation takes so much of resources. Anything you can do to improve the content creation advantageous for the companies.
Yeah, I mean, and they use the phrase, and I'm not sure I had heard it before, but the notion of a content supply chain.
Yeah.
So, we always think of product supply chains, but they're like, hey, this is a content supply chain. And so that was an interesting way to phrase what they were doing. And it kind of, put a different twist on it and made me think about it differently. But it's true, and that's what they were doing, is figuring out a way to, you know, develop this content, customize it in different ways, and then target and send it out, to these different markets, and then even track how well it was received in each of those targets. So just, and a massive amount of data being used as well. That was the other thing that was surprising to me, was how much data, and then analysis of that data, because that's the other thing we've seen with Gen AI in general is, all those people used to talk about big data analytics. And then at the end of the day,
Hmm.
it was really hard for people to kind of make sense of all this raw data.
Right.
Now you're seeing these Gen AI tools being leveraged, in very smart ways to actually get the insights into massive data sets in ways and find the patterns, frankly,
Yeah.
that were otherwise really, really difficult to do.
Yeah, and you analytical tools which actually give much better trends and much better insights into the data than just
Exactly.
some person's intuition, right?
Yeah, no, and last little detail on that too is that, and in the past, those things required, data scientists to create the queries.
Yeah,
Now, and what one of the things they're showing is like, hey, show me how well this ad did with,
yeah,
20 somethings in the Midwest or something, college educated 20 somethings in the Midwest, whatever, some kind of sub segment. And boom, it did it. And you didn't have to worry about building these, big SQL queries and all this kind of stuff. It just, was able to do that. So very cool as well.
yeah, indeed. So we touched upon this a little bit. The announcements that they had quite a few of them, including the customization of models, the Firefly services, the Gen Studio that we just talked about, and fine tuning the images with styles that you like and so on, and it give some reference and it would basically generate images in the style that you would need, right?
Yep.
So all these were of course powerful tools for digital content generation, allowing companies to do personalization at scale, right? So we all talk to enterprises, and one of the major request from them has been that they want to not only use this generic models, also need the ability to optimize themselves
Yep.
or customize themselves and use their own data. That has been one of the biggest requests from the enterprise customers. So, and Adobe delivered with custom models, right? So I think that was pretty interesting and very useful for the enterprises.
Absolutely, because ironically, as great as Firefly is for being, you know, uh, it's the content is safe, it's not used from copyrighted material. Well, if you're the company that owns the copyright, like you're Coca Cola,
Yeah.
you obviously own the Coke logo. You want the tool to be able to use your own logo to create new variations. And exactly as you said, that's what they had this Firefly services,
Yeah.
they called it, that allows you to say, hey, use your ability to do all kinds of other stuff, but incorporate the IP that we have or the images that we have
Hmm.
to do those. And so that's a
Yep.
huge benefit. So then you get the obviously the ability to use your own stuff, but then leverage all the other creative elements around it
Hmm.
that aren't unique to the particular logo or of somebody or other types of images that they're associated with. So that's and they said it's like you only need like 20 images or something like that to do this. So that means it's relatively simple as well for companies to get into this and take advantage of that. So that to me, I thought was really interesting also.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need another, PhD data scientist developing the model for you, right?
Yeah.
I think they said 100 or less images, they could basically get a custom model of on their own. Then, main thing as you mentioned was keeping the brand identity. Right now, there is no control, right? Without this custom models, you basically have to take the color scheme, another type of imagery, and so on, whatever it generates. You can, but there is no way for enterprises to enforce their brand identity
Yeah.
on the images that are created.
Yeah, and then I mean, yeah, and within two other things that I thought were interesting.
Hmm.
One, they have what they would call these Adobe Experience Platform AI assistants, which basically is how do you make it easier to use their tools? Because as I will say, and as a longtime user of many of Adobe's tools, things like Photoshop and Premiere are super powerful, but they're super confusing. They're hard to learn.
Yeah,
And so,
yeah,
it's great that they recognize that, and we're developing these basically, simplified ways to interact
exactly.
with the program. And some of it came through specific features. Adobe, they talked a lot about generative fill within Photoshop and how important that was, and other things like that.
Hmm.
But taking that idea even further, I think, is important, because
Hmm.
that opens up the ability for more people to use these applications more effectively.
Of course. And another announcement was with the collaboration with Microsoft.
Yeah.
That seems to be an interesting partnership. Looks like Microsoft is working across the aisle with many players. I mean, they have their own stuff, co-pilots. They work with OpenAI. They invested in Mistral, and they opened another new AI unit, and so on. And they're working with Adobe as well. Looks like it's basically cross leveraging each of their assets and markets to sell together.
Yeah, and I'll be curious to see how this evolves, because I they were a little vague, to be honest, on what the details of this were going to be. But
Yeah.
I mean, it does make sense, because if you think about it,
Mm.
there's going to be certain content creation things in terms of editing an image or building images, what have you, that then you're going to want to incorporate into, say, Microsoft Office documents, right? So there's a lot of very logical connections between the two companies,
Yeah.
and I'm guessing we'll see more along those lines. But you're right. I mean, Microsoft is clearly trying to focus on the enterprise software story across the board for Gen AI, and Adobe makes another great partner slash example of the things that companies can do. So just highlights, how important I think Gen AI is going to be in the enterprise, and not just consumer. Everybody's been focused on consumer. I frankly think that's going to be more interesting in the enterprise first than it is actually in the consumer market.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, and that's one of the key takeaways as well for me from the event. It is no longer just a demo or a trial or something, interesting to have or good to have, but it's becoming a business critical
Yeah.
in terms of improving the performance of your workloads, like digital content creation and so on with Adobe, Gen AI.
No, you're right. I mean, and I think they use a phrase somewhat similar to this, which is that, 2023 was the year of Gen AI experimentation, and 2024 is the year of Gen AI implementation.
Yeah.
Um, and I think I think they are a great example of how that's starting to happen.
I think that is a perfect way to close our session. Any final comments?
No, I mean, it's going to be very interesting to watch, to see how they evolve their other tools and everything else. I mean, we're
Yeah.
still early days, of course, with Gen AI, as you know,
Yeah.
and I'll be curious to see what they do, and again, how the partnership with Microsoft evolves, and other things they might do with other vendors. So certainly exciting time.
All right. Very well, Bob. As usual, great discussion, and thank you very much for all of your insights. So, folks, that's all we have for now. Hope you found this discussion informative and useful. If so, please hit like and subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you are listening this on. Also, don't forget to check out the additional details in the episode description, including the articles that I have written and the article that Bob has written specifically regarding the event. I'll be back very soon with another episode, putting light on another interesting tech subject. Bye bye for now.